Ladies and gentlemen, we ask you to take your seats while we get started. Ladies and gentlemen, please stand for the arrival of the Governor General of the Federation of St. Christopher, St. Kitts and Nevis, Her Excellency Dame Marcella Liebert, and rendering of the national anthem by the 2024 Junior Calypso Monarch, Mr. Edward Williams.
O land of beauty, our country where peace abounds, thy children stands free on the strength of will and love, with God in all our struggles. Saint Kitts and Nevis be a nation bound together with a common destiny. As stalwarts we stand for justice and liberty, with wisdom and truth. We will serve and honor thee. No sword, no spear can conquer, for God will sure defend. His blessing shall forever to posterity extend.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain standing for the invocation by Bishop Philip Webb of the Church of God of Prophecy, St. Kitts and Nevis.
We are blessed to be alive on day number 5 in the 11th month in 2025, with 25 more days left in this month. But by extension, we are on day number 309 with 56 more days left in 2025. So it's a privilege to be here and to be a part of this 27th Sir Arthur Lewis Memorial Lecture. And I wish to just honor the Lord So would you pray with me? Father, with a heart of gratitude, with a heart of praise, and with a heart of thanksgiving, you told us, dear God, to honor your word, for your word is a lamp to our feet and a light unto our pathway. And we pray, dear Heavenly Father, that what is about to be brought to this table would be of some help, would be of some substance, will be of some strength to all those who have come to witness this. We ask, dear God, for your guidance, for your protection, for your covering over your people. We pray that you will give the special guests that will bring forth your word during this lecture to be of some revelation and inspiration in this federation and the Caribbean and the world at large. I pray for your divine intervention also, and I ask that you will fill such person with wisdom, and that in the end it would be of some value to each and every one of us. Bless this session, we ask in Jesus' name.
Thank you, Bishop Webb. Please be seated. Your Excellency, Governor General of the Federation of St. Christopher and Nevis, Dame Marcella Althea Liebert, GCMG JP, the Honorable Prime Minister and ECCB Council Member for St. Christopher and Nevis, Dr. Terence Drew and Mrs. Prince Drew, Minister of Finance and ECCB Monetary Council Member for Grenada, the Honorable Dennis Cornwall, Honorable Speaker of the National Assembly, St. Christopher and Nevis, Lenine Blanchett, the Right Honorable Dr. Denzel Douglas, Senior Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs, International Trade, Industry, Commerce and Consumer Affairs, Economic Development and Investment, other honorable members of the Federal Cabinet, members of the Diplomatic and Consular Corps, Governor of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, Timothy N.J. Antoine and Mrs. Antoine, Deputy Governor of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, Dr. Valda Henry, ECCB Board Member for St. Christopher and Nevis, Hilary Hazel and Mr. Ellis Hazel, Chief Director of Policy, Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, Dr. D. Tracy Polius, Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Finance, Government of Anguilla, Marissa Harding Hodge, Permanent Secretaries and Senior Government Officials, Dr. Kristen Surak, 27th Sir Arthur Lewis Memorial Lecturer, former Deputy Governor of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, Mr. Trevor Obi Brathwaite, Dean of Studies, Anguilla Community College, and recipient institution of the inaugural ECCB Alison M. Phils Book Award, Dr. Michelle Quealy, management and staff of the ECCB and affiliate institutions, presenters and delegates attending the 7th Annual Conference with licensed financial institutions, principals, teachers, and students, individuals joining us online and via radio and television stations across the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 27th Sir Arthur Lewis Memorial Lecture, which will be delivered by Dr. Kristen Surak on the topic, Development by Design, Leveraging Citizenship for Economic Resilience in Small Island Developing States. Before the lecture, we invite you to view a short video on the work and life of Sir Arthur Lewis titled Sir W. Arthur Lewis, A Lasting Legacy. The video was published by the Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs, Princeton University.
Sir Arthur Lewis. He made it seem like it was every day. Every day you become the first to win a prize like that.
Arthur remains the only white person ever to have won a Nobel Prize in the science subjects other than literature and peace.
He was the the first black student at the London School of Economics, the first black teacher at the London School of Economics. He was the first black faculty member at the University of Manchester, the first black full professor at Princeton University.
I saw him as a rebel. He was born on a small island, not too many resources, but clearly smart as a whip. And he goes on to be knighted, to become the first black professor at Princeton, advisor to African and Caribbean governments. Got to be rebel in that.
To come out of the Caribbean, be educated, have thinking in those years about development economics is more pioneering than we can ever think.
Arthur was born on the very small island of St. Lucia.
Dad was born January 23rd of 1915 in St. Lucia in the West Indies, which at that time was a British colony. He got sick when he was really young.
So he could not attend school right away. And so his father gave him lots of lessons on the stuff that he would be learning in first and second grade, and did such a good job that Arthur was promoted 2 classes above the class that he should have been in. The small island of St. Lucia had one very good high school, St. Mary's College, where he was given a most proper English education.
So he ended up leaving school at age 16 and had to wait to go into college because those days early admission for being younger than normal didn't happen. And at that point he was helping his mom. They owned a store, so he was helping doing business administration. He then took the scholarship that was one scholarship for all the islands and won it. And so he ended up at the University of London for his undergraduate career.
Arthur decided that he would go to the London School of Economics and study commerce. So here is this young man. He's the first black student at the London School of Economics. His first advisor said, "This is the smartest guy I've seen." His mentors at the London School of Economics said, "We think you could study for a PhD." And so he decided that he would do that. So he teaches at LSE. The fact that this is the first black man who was ever going to teach at the London School of Economics is a big deal. But he was given a 1-year career, and he was not permitted to advise students individually. There was the fear, proved to be absolutely wrong, that students might not want to be advised by a black man. But they loved him, so they overwhelmingly asked to be advised by him.
He was so easy to approach.
He was my idea of the ultimate professorial professor, and if anything, a little bit of an absent-minded professor. But when you spoke with him, you realize he's anything but. He made just a strong impression on me.
He was always enamored of education. He thought that education was the way in which individuals and societies could realize their ambitions.
One of the reasons we went to public school was because it was important to encourage the public schools to be good, so that the kids who went through the public school system were as good as the ones who went to the private schools. How do you continue to have the high expectations for all students, no matter where they come from?
A number of students are coming from the third world. And so they said to Arthur, "We don't want to study just about economics of developed countries. We want to study about the economics of less developed countries." And so he introduced, for the first time, a course called Colonial Economics. It was the beginning of his work in that particular field.
He was very interested in a broad range of things to do with economic growth, but I think the thing he's most famous for is this sort of story of why economic growth didn't automatically stop people being poor.
Economic development with unlimited supplies of labor. That is his most famous article.
It it's about 56, 55, and he has this insight that the current economic models aren't working because they're assuming a limited supply of labor. And when you look at the developing countries, you've got an unlimited supply of labor. So the price of labor is constantly being suppressed by young people coming in from the countryside, keeping the wages low. And that becomes the basis for the economic work that he did and the forming of the development economics branch.
It was his experience in some of these third world countries that had a profound influence on him. And the West Indies, surely. He was a West Indian. He understood the dilemmas that were facing the West Indies. Lewis was very much in favor of the union of all of the West Indian islands that were part of the British Empire. When it seemed to be coming apart, he said that he would try to persuade the various nationalist politicians that what they should do is try to create this United West Indian Federation. He exhausted himself, had some fainting spells, and the physician came and looked at him and said, "You can't do this anymore. It's going to kill you." He decided that he had to look around for another position, and that other position was Princeton University.
There are 4 fields in the Woodrow Wilson School. They tried to bring in distinguished professors in each of those 4 areas. So he would have been, in that sense, the founding professor of the development field at Princeton.
His insights were profound, and they very much influenced our master's students in the Woodrow Wilson School, where it's a professional school. So he was able to also infuse for them not only the theoretical underpinnings of his thinking, but also the fact that he had been doing himself and how they can use those models in order to make change in the real world.
I just wanted someone to give me a template as to how countries develop, so I could go do what I'm doing. And I've had that template for my whole career.
Economics studies the real world, and the more of the real world you get in there, the better. His background is much more like the students we have in the Woodrow Wilson School than the professors we have in the economics department.
He started here in Princeton at 63. He was the first and only black full professor at that point. There was an assistant professor, but he was the first full professor. The whole civil rights movement is happening. Princeton is debating whether or not to have women, and all of those kinds of issues are happening in the 60s. So they asked Dad if he had any opinion as to teaching women, and he says, no. He doesn't have a problem. Why should he have a problem?
When I came to Princeton in '75, there was not a lot of color here. For students like myself, it did make a difference to see a person of color here.
Institutions of higher education need to reflect our society. And in light of the discussions that were happening on campus here at Princeton 2 years ago or so, where there was a real effort by the students to say, you've done a great job at admitting a more diverse student body. But you know what? We look around and we don't see our faces in the iconography, and we don't see our names in the naming of buildings and other important places on campus. At the Woodrow Wilson School, there's really no more important place than the Sir Arthur Lewis Auditorium. We hold classes there, we hold our public events there. It's a very important space within Robertson Hall. And so it was a very important gesture for us to rename it after somebody who was so foundational and so important and such a pathbreaker as was Sir Arthur Lewis.
There is a lot of attachment to the building. That is the place that resonates with me when I think of him, because that's where his office was. He has a strong history with that building.
Sir Arthur Lewis is most deserving to have that auditorium named after him.
I think he'd be flattered, and part of him would be wondering, isn't there anybody better? I don't know that he ever grew out of the I was just doing my job attitude.
he contributed greatly to the wider world, which is what Princeton is about.
Sir Arthur Lewis really exemplifies the best of Princeton and the Woodrow Wilson School. He was not only a top academic, as reflected in his Nobel Prize in economics, but he was also a practitioner who believed in the power of the economic discipline for making policy change and for making economic development come alive in many contexts. And that is really what the power of the Woodrow Wilson School is here at Princeton.
I personally think that his life is one of the most extraordinary lives of achievements.
Ladies and gentlemen, I believe in my excitement to get you to the best part of this evening's event, I neglected to introduce myself. I am Shernal Thompson with the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank and your MC this evening. Now for the good part. Kristin Surak is Associate Professor of Political Sociology at the London School of Economics. Her research on global mobility, nationalism, and Japanese politics has been translated into over a dozen languages. Her most recent book, The Golden Passport, Global Mobility for Millionaires, Harvard University Press 2023, provides the first ethnographic analysis of the global market in the sale of citizenship to the wealthy and has been covered by the BBC, NPR, Foreign Affairs, The Economist, and other news outlets around the world. She has held several internationally recognized positions, including Richard B. Fisher, member of the Institute of Advanced Study in Princeton, Fung Global Fellow at Princeton University, Sainsbury Fellow at the Sainsbury Institute for Japanese Arts and Cultures. She is a lifetime fellow of Clare Hall, University of Cambridge, and has been a visiting professor at the Tokyo University of Foreign Studies and New York University in Abu Dhabi. The American Academy of Political and Social Science has recognized her scholarship, which has been funded by the German Science Foundation, DFG, Economic and Social Research Council, ESRC, Japan Foundation, the Fulbright Hayes Foundation, and Leverhulme Foundation, among others. She comments regularly for the global media, including the BBC, Bloomberg TV, Huffington Post, Channel News Asia TV, and Sky TV News, and her research has been covered by the New York Times, CNBC, Wall Street Journal, Boston Globe, Foreign Affairs, The Evening Standard, Al Jazeera, Le Monde Diplomatique, Frankfurter, Asahi newspaper, and other media outlets in over 30 countries. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming Dr. Kristin Surak to the podium to deliver the 27th Sir Arthur Lewis Memorial Lecture under the theme, Development by Design, Leveraging Citizenship for Economic Resilience in Small Island Developing States. Dr. Surak.
I'll lower this a little bit because I'm not quite as tall as some of the other people in the room. And I must say that it is an enormous pleasure to be here tonight, and a great honor as well. It's not only a wonderful chance to talk about the research that I've been doing for the past 10 years in the region, where it's been one of the very important part of this, but it's also a great honor to be doing this as a part of the Sir Arthur Lewis Memorial Lecture Series. So let's see if this, okay. And as you know, as we just heard on the, in that short video, Sir Arthur Lewis was the first Black student admitted to the LSE and the first Black teacher there. what's really striking is, of course, that the first Black student didn't have to be as good as all the other students. He had to be good enough to go on and win a Nobel Prize. And so finally, after many years, the LSE has recognized the achievements that he brought to the university, created over the course of his career, and has finally named this, you can sit over here, this brand new building, enormous, beautiful, on Lincoln's Inn Fields, the Sir Arthur Lewis building is now at the LSE, and it's wonderful. So it's from the LSE that I come here today to talk to you. And to talk about an issue that I think has been very important to the region, namely citizenship by investment. So here are the websites of the 5 countries in the region that have these programs. There are, to give a sense of the way this works globally, there's summits all over the world where people go and they look at the options that are there. Here's one that was quite recent in London. There's events here in the region. The last time I had the honor of being in St. Kitts was right before COVID, when you can see some of the key people behind the programs having a panel on these as well. So it's a very important part of the region. And we all know that citizenship by investment is out there, but I want to take the opportunity to think about a couple of different things around it. First, what is the future of CBI going to look like? What are the benefits and the risks for economic development? And what does this mean for the region? So I'll be hitting on those topics tonight, but I'll be doing this based on quite a lot of fieldwork and study that I've put in over the past decade. So since 2015, I've put my own pretty privileged passport. I'm a US citizen, and I've been in the UK long enough to naturalize there. And I've now been to over 22 countries on 6 continents, and I've talked to more than 500 people to find out how it all works. So I've talked to lawyers, service providers, government officials, wealthy buyers, local populations, put together a data set on the programs as well. And so I've tried to understand how this whole world works. And I'll share those findings with you today and how I've approached it as an academic researcher as well. But let's start off with the basics. First off, what is citizenship by investment? Now, sometimes it gets described as cash for passports. But of course, it's not really that. And in fact, it gets confused often with 2 neighboring things. We've got citizenship by investment, sometimes known as golden passports, but I'll discuss what goes into that. And sometimes it gets confused with what I describe as discretionary economic citizenship, as well as residence by investment programs, or golden visas. So in the first instance, there's discretionary economic citizenship. And I apologize for the, sometimes when you move from one computer to another, the labeling of the font don't transfer so well, so I apologize for any differences that are suddenly appearing. They're new to me too. I hope it's not too confusing either. So discretionary economic citizenship. Any sovereign, any state can grant citizenship to whomever it wants. And it can do so on whatever grounds it wants. And it can do this in a discretionary manner. And this happens, virtually every country in the world will do this. It's a kind of, France made, this is Macron with Snapchat billionaire Evan Spiegel. He became a citizen of France in California. New Zealand made Peter Thiel, the founder of PayPal, a citizen after he spent a few days there and donated to an earthquake relief fund. But these are effectively individualized discretionary grants for economic reasons, right? It's very individualized and personal. Citizenship by investment is different. These are formal government programs that grant citizenship based on a predefined investment, usually real estate, sometimes business, or a monetary donation to the country. So from the government's perspective, it's often seen as, we make you a citizen because you've done something substantial for us. Now, these programs will have set price points, they've got specified investment types, they have clear time frames, there's a formal application process, but it's set in a way through a bureaucratic process as well, so that basically anyone with the qualifications can apply, and they might be rejected as well. And if you are approved, typically the programs, if we look globally, you can become a citizen in between a few months to a year. Now, citizenship by investment is also different from residence by investment programs, these sorts of golden visa programs, which are actually all over the world. We have them in Portugal, Spain, US. We've gotten a lot of new coverage of the Trump Gold Card recently. In fact, about 60 countries have golden visa programs on offer. But this is different to citizenship by investment too, because citizenship is very different to residence. The rights are different, so with citizenship, you can apply to the government to get a passport, whereas a residence is just a visa and a passport. The stakes and the trajectories are different. Citizenship is inheritable, whereas residence is not, so it becomes a longer-term relationship that gets passed down through a family. Citizenship is harder to lose and to revoke than residence. Often with residence by investment programs, if you sell the investment, you lose the visa. And demand can be quite different too. Sometimes people are only looking for residence. Not everybody's looking for citizenship as well. And not all countries with residence by investment programs enable people to become citizens either. Thailand, for example, very, very popular residence by investment program, but no pathway to citizenship. So these are two very different things. Now, if that's how we can look at citizenship by investment for research purposes, which is what I do as a professor, we can then ask, where do we find it? So where is citizenship by investment? Now, if one way to look at where these programs are is just to simply to look at the laws on the books, in terms of the definitions that I was setting out earlier. And when we look at that globally, these are countries with programs that have had programs in the past 10 years. You can see that they're actually in quite a number of world regions. Oh, good, we can have it here too. Okay. These are countries with legal provisions, so whether you have a real operating program and are approving people or not is a different question, but we have the Caribbean, Europe, Middle East, Africa, Pacific Rim. More countries in Europe have begun to close down programs recently, but we can see that they're actually quite broad, and so I think that's important to keep in mind too. It's not just in the Caribbean. Just as a side note, what about golden visas? As I said before, it's in nearly 60 countries. It's 59 countries plus 5 dependencies. These are all over the world. And we also find them in the Caribbean too. So Anguilla, Bahamas, Barbados, Bermuda, Cayman, Curacao, Dominican Republic all have residence by investment programs as well. Now, we can also, just going back into the basics, when did this all start? If we're just looking at the legal provisions, we can see that before the 1990s, a number of countries had programs. Pakistan did have a legal provision in 1951, but I've never heard of anybody naturalizing through this. And so when St. Kitts often takes credit for really kicking things off, there's reason for that. The timeline goes from 2005 to the present. And I think what's really interesting here in looking at the countries as well is that most of the countries with programs now, we've seen some countries enter, some countries leave. But they've really taken off since 2013. So if we look at the countries with citizenship by investment provisions today, about half of those have started in the past 12 years or so. And what's also important to note is that, if it used to be, small island developing countries, oftentimes former British colonies, now we've got a lot of interesting entrants. So Turkey, for example, Egypt, for example, Jordan, for example, all have started programs. Now, we can also ask, why are people interested in this? Why do people want a quote-unquote golden passport? And it's important to remember, too, that there's a difference between citizenship and a passport. And I think that's really important, too. Now, citizenship by investment is about citizenship. You can be a citizen of a country and not have a passport, and about half of all U.S. citizens fall into that category. They don't have a passport, but they're a citizen. You could have a passport but not have citizenship, and a lot of people all over the world with diplomatic passports are not necessarily citizens of the countries they're representing. And it's also important to remember, too, that citizenship does not entitle you to a passport. I think India is the only exception. You're allowed to apply for it. And in fact, you don't even own your own passport. If you look at your passport, it will say that it is the property of the government that's issuing it as well. So I think that's also important to keep in mind in some of these debates too. So now we can look at why people go for it, because they do tend to think of it as a quote-unquote golden passport, even though it really is citizenship that's at stake. I argued with Harvard University Press about the title of my book. I was like, but it's not a golden passport. But they kind of insisted on that one. But I think it's important to remember that it's citizenship. So why do people go for this? Now, some people think that it's only criminals and money launderers who are interested, and of course journalists have exposed some of those cases, the bad apples who have gotten approved as well, those do exist. But for the most part, the motives are pretty mundane, and I've traveled around the world and talked to a lot of people who are looking into these options. So the first one that comes up is mobility in the present. It's visa-free travel. It reminds me, for example, of a tech entrepreneur whom I met in Dubai. He had a PhD. He was the head of regional sales in Dubai for a major international company. But because he was from Pakistan, he could only go to about 35 countries visa-free, and he had to travel a lot. And he said, I get my visas, it's just a hassle. And so I encountered a lot of people saying this: I want to be able to travel or live wherever I want without worrying about the visa. And sometimes we also see people with quote-unquote good passports, like US citizens, seeking out alternative mobility options because of the danger they may face because of, for example, kidnapping in certain parts of the world. I've encountered people like that as well. But it's not just present mobility, it can be also future mobility, a sort of plan B. Citizenship is an insurance policy. So what is Xi Jinping going to do next? What is Recep Erdogan going to do next? And as one interview I spoke to described, in an authoritarian regime, the key thing is to retain flexibility. So many people are looking for an option just in case, an extra passport as a way to hedge risks. Now, what's been really interesting in looking at this field is that who those people are has changed dramatically over the past 10 years. So in 2015, there were very few US citizens whom I encountered who were looking at these options, but now we see more and more because they're worried about the government, they don't trust the government, they're not quite sure, they don't feel safe any longer, and they're not necessarily looking to move immediately. They want, simply a place they can go when they begin to feel incredibly unsafe as well. Now, the reason I encountered in the field was lifestyle options, this sort of thing of I'm doing it for the children, naturalize in Malta so you can have access to Swiss doctors. One person I spoke to came from a very wealthy family, but he was expected to work. And he said, there's an unspoken hierarchy for employment, and my parents have been adamant about my employability. He was a young adult from East Asia, and he was very wealthy, and he was thinking about working in Europe. But he was thinking about the way that it might be easier depending on his citizenship. And then the final reason are business opportunities, financial moves, wealth structuring, these sorts of things. So as one interviewer I spoke to described, it's just if you're doing business in Europe, it's just much easier to be European. It's more efficient. So everything from import tax issues, banking issues, getting lines of credit, all sorts of things important to doing business globally can depend on your nationality. And this is where it becomes interesting. Geopolitics plays a big role too. So it's not always only about getting into the West. When I was in Dubai, I was struck by, there's a lot of Iranians in Dubai, but they can get hit by US sanctions because they apply to all Iranians globally. So you could have been in Dubai since 1979, but you're still feeling that impact from the US. So there can be, business benefits people are interested in, and it can also, thinking about, possibilities for financial crime that people talk about too. So, for example, in Cambodia, which has a citizenship by investment program, they naturalize a couple hundred, around, sometimes in a good year, maybe 500 people. About a third of those people have changed their names in their passports. So those concerns can be very, very real. I think that's changed a lot in the Caribbean as well. So how many people are we talking about then? If those are the motives for why people would be looking at these options, how many people go for them? So it's very difficult to get good numbers on the programs and good numbers globally and good numbers from so many different countries. So this is the best I've been able to do so far in looking at the global image. So this is based on government reports, it's sometimes based on official statements, sometimes it's based on extrapolations based on official statements as well. And the numbers that I can say this, with any kind of gesture globally, go up to 2019. In part because COVID-19 had a big impact on applications and processing, and also in part because just the scene has got more varied and mixed since then, and it's just hard to get good global numbers. But these are the countries that have been running really active programs. It's one thing to have the law in the books, it's another thing to have an active program. And we see it's basically been 5 in the Caribbean, Malta, although Malta closed its program a couple of months ago, Vanuatu, Turkey have been very main ones. And the result is that about maybe about 2,500 applications get approved each, or 25,000 get approved each year. But that also, you have to remember that each application is not just the main applicant, it's the family members too. So for each investment or each donation, you'll have the main applicant, and then on average, about 1.7 additional family members getting citizenship as well. And so here you can also see that historically, the Caribbean has been a big, big part of the global markets. The Caribbean, a little bit of Europe. You can see the rise of Vanuatu to some degree, and then you see Turkey just shooting through the roof. So Turkey started off at $1 million US. In 2018, it dropped the price point to $250,000 US, and you could invest in real estate, and then just the numbers skyrocketed. And they continued on beyond that. So the numbers for Turkey I have are based on tweets by the Minister of the Interior. But that's the best I've been able to do, and since he's the Minister of the Interior, I'm kind of going with that. But Turkey is, at that point in time, probably about half the global market as well. Now, if we break this down individually, I don't have such complete coverage in terms of individual country approvals. So these are just the countries that I've been able to get data on, and they go up to 2022. 3 in the Caribbean, so St. Lucia, Antigua, Grenada, and then Cyprus, Malta, North Macedonia, Montenegro, and Jordan. And we can see that in most cases, this has been about 500 applications or less in many places. I think if we were to get good numbers now for 2024, 2025, we'd see much bigger numbers in some of these places. But it's interesting that this is what it looks like when you add Vanuatu, a much bigger proportion. And then if you add in Turkey, it's even bigger. So I think this is, and if we were to look now at, for example, Egypt and Jordan, we'd probably see much higher numbers too, because they'll still naturalize Russians. And we'd probably see higher numbers for some of the Caribbean countries as well. So this is part of the bigger global scene in which the Caribbean operates, and in which it's important to keep in mind when we're thinking about where the region is as well. So where are these people from then? We have all these people getting citizenship. So this is where I've been able to get data on country of origin, and I put the Eastern Caribbean over on the left and the other countries where I was able to get those data on the right. And you can see the total averages for the region. In blue are Chinese. In dark blue is the rest of Asia. So in the Caribbean, there's around 30%, 33%, about a third. Then above that, we have green, so Russia and former Soviet states. We see much more interest in Cyprus, Montenegro, sort of that neck of the woods. In pink, people from Middle East and North Africa, also we see a lot of interest in the Caribbean coming from that. Yellow is Anglophone, which is kind of a tricky category. It's basically the US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. So countries that have this reputation for being countries of immigration, places to go where you put your kids in school. But we also see people from these countries, largely US and Canada, also taking an interest in the Caribbean. And then African countries in purple, much bigger interest in the Caribbean, and growing recently as well. So if this is where people are from, and where they're going and where they're selecting, what about those countries themselves? What about places in the Caribbean? So among others as well, what do countries get out of it? What are the benefits? And then we should also consider, what are the risks? So in thinking about these issues, I think it's important to kind of think also about the bigger global context. So in the Caribbean, we've got the 5 Eastern Caribbean countries, plus El Salvador recently launched a program. It's $1 million US in crypto. So I don't know how popular it's been so far. The light blue countries have a legal provision on the books, but they're not really using them actively at present. Comoros is kind of a gray area case in a lot of ways. But Egypt, Jordan, Turkey, Cambodia, Nauru, Vanuatu have been important. as well. And Sao Tome has recently opened a program too. Now, one common justification that governments give for opening programs is the need for revenue or economic investment. And so in talking about benefits and risks, I'll focus mainly on that today, although there are a lot of ways that people can talk about that, and we can discuss those in questions as well. So we can look first at what is the form and amount of money that countries are setting? What are those targets? So in terms of the investment options, it's usually, for most countries, number one, government donation, then they'll probably add real estate as well as a business investment. Some countries have government bonds, some countries have stocks, funds, and shares, some countries have others. And then what we see on the figure is what are the minimum investment amounts. So in the Eastern Caribbean, I put the countries on top, there's been an agreement to make a floor of at least $200,000 US, and you can see how the investment options are now really lining up along that. And that's pretty much, kind of middle of the road globally as well. You can see Jordan through the roof, $1.4 million US in stocks, funds, and shares. You can see El Salvador is also very, very high. You can see too, though, that Sao Tome and Nauru are now at about 100,000 US as well, but offering, the benefits that are on offer, in effect, are quite different over there than in the Caribbean as well. So that's just part of this global spread in which the Caribbean is operating. If we want to know what people are actually choosing, we can look at, let's look at what they do in practice. And so I'm gonna here zoom in on the Caribbean cases. And we can look at which options people choose over time. So I've been able to get data for Dominica, Antigua, St. Lucia, and Grenada. And we can see that people go for either real estate or government donations. They tend not to do business, they tend not to do government bonds, they don't do other things on offer. These are the main things that they're really looking for. Now, let's break those down, see what's happening, both in terms of the government donations and then in terms of real estate. So from the government budgets, and you can go online and access all these. This is how I got those numbers. Go online, look at the government budget numbers. Here, the amount of money governments are getting in tax revenue is in gray. Other sorts of revenue they get is in orange. And then the revenue going to the government from CBI programs, which is going to be typically donations and fees, is in blue. And this is what's declared in the government budgets. Grenada, until about 2 years ago, kept it as a separate accounting category, so I put their CBI column slightly different from the rest because the counting is done slightly different, although now it's harmonized with the rest of the region. And this is what it's looked like over time, so since earlier days in the program. So in St. Kitts and Dominique, it's been about 30% of the government revenue, in Antigua about 10%, smaller in St. Lucia, less than 5% in Grenada, upwards of 20% as well. But if we look more recently, this is just 2022 to 2023, we can see it's been much, much bigger. Part of this is also because the numbers of approvals have grown over time as well. So now in Dominica and in St. Kitts, it's about 60% of government revenue. In Grenada, it's about 20%. Antigua, it's just under 10%. And St. Lucia, it's under 5%. So this, the biggest correlation here is country size and the importance of this as a revenue source. So for governments, the smaller the country, the more important it's become for the government to run as well. So the IMF would question, is this, creating too much of a dependency on a single revenue source? And I think that's an important issue to debate as well. But you can see that it's become a really important revenue source for governments to run and carry out their business. What about real estate? Now, the impact on real estate is much, much more difficult to evaluate. We do get things like resorts that get built or get upgraded, and this can contribute to the construction sector, it can contribute to the tourism sector, it can contribute to local employment. We get some things like, this is a road that I drove past last time I was in Grenada that had been built through citizenship by investment funds. But I think, as everybody in the region would know, there's also been a history of uncompleted projects that don't create as much value for the money or as much value for the country has been hoped as well. And one reason for this is there's a really complex global industry around it with these extended supply chains. So there's these big chains of service providers that connect people to countries, and there's lots of money that flow down that supply chain as well. And that has a big impact on the economic benefit to countries, which might not see all the benefits that are promised. So if we know that governments have now begun to really rely on these revenues to keep them going, especially during difficult times, especially when there aren't a lot of alternatives, this can also make us think about some of the risks to keep in mind too. Now, some international actors, like the OECD, FATF, US, UK, EU, IMF, have produced reports on these programs, and they've identified what are, for them, the key risks. So at the international level, they'll say there's identity laundering risks, money laundering risks, security risks, tax risks. And at the local level for the countries, they'll say there's risks around corruption, risks of loss of visa-free travel, risk of over-economic dependence as well. So sometimes their analyses, I'd say there's a bit of politicking going on behind it. Sometimes there's poor research design. So, in the FATF OECD report, there's a lot that's, I think, right on in terms of that report, but there's also parts where I think, actually the risks that you're identifying and pointing fingers at are much bigger in other channels that are effectively, as they define it, they're interested in this sort of exchange of documents for financial contributions or money. And if you want to look at the risks around discretionary economic citizenship, gray market documents, diplomatic passports, black market documents, some of these risks are much, much bigger. And so there can be a tendency to finger point as well. And it's also important to remember that, the EU has been putting a lot of pressure on Caribbean countries. The EU hasn't been pressuring a country like Turkey, for example, but the EU also pays Turkey 9 billion euros to keep refugees out of Europe. So there's a real politics in the background of this, which probably, to be honest, in thinking about Europe, probably every banana grower in the region would know about as well. But there's still things. I think, some of these topics are still important topics for debate and discussion and figuring out here in the region where people think programs should go. So these international, international actors have raised these risks. But what's interesting, too, is we've also seen here in the region movements to make changes and improve programs to make sure that they're run more transparently and run more effectively. Recently here at the ECCB, I wasn't a part of this, but they've put together a statement or a set of draft legislation for the Eastern Caribbean Citizenship by Investment Regulatory Authority. You can go online and see the draft legislation that's going through the countries right now, and I do encourage everybody. I think it's important to, this is an important local debate, and it's important to inform yourself, to be a part of this debate in an intelligent way. So. I was having a look through it this afternoon, and it was making sure that countries agreed to regional standards regarding program operation, regarding due diligence checks, those background checks, and to be honest, in the Caribbean right now, they're often stronger than what you find in Europe for standard visas. Procedures around interviews and name changes, procedures around audits and escrow accounts, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot, I think, that's being done in the region to tighten things up. And so this is your homework, right? So I'm a professor. It's hard to stand in front of an audience like this and not talk about assignments and discussion and homework. But I think there needs to be real informed discussion here. And that's up to you here in the region. So the international players have weighed in, but what's the local assessment? What are the benefits? What are the risks? What are the alternatives? And, what's the right balance? And that's for people here to decide. And it's a decision and a discussion, I think, that needs to also occur, keeping this bigger global scene in mind, too, including where things are going. Because it's easy if you're in the Eastern Caribbean, just to think about the Eastern Caribbean, but there's a much bigger picture. So, for example, we've seen this year a new entrant, Sao Tome. Next year, Botswana is planning to open a program, and there may be others as well. And there's other bigger shifts in the world, too, in this wider scene of which the Eastern Caribbean is a part. We see shifts in the internal politics of countries. And I say that as a U.S. citizen. 10 years ago, there were not many U.S. citizens looking at these options, and now there's a lot more. We see shifts in the geopolitics between countries. So, for example, Russian citizens may disagree with the war in Ukraine, they may disagree with Putin, but they still face a lot of difficulties in living global lives and carrying out even just carrying out their jobs. Because of those geopolitics, because of where they're from. Sanctions are being increasingly used by a weapon. We're seeing shifts in the places of wealth accumulation as well, and that will be compounded even more with changes coming down the road with AI, as well as climate change. So we see new places where people are looking to, for different options. We're seeing shifts in how identity documents works and are used for travel. We're seeing more retina scans, for example. The biometricization of identity documents, too, will change things in this field. And we see people are now living much more mobile and multi-based lives. We've seen the rise, for example, especially since COVID-19, of, say, digital nomads, of people looking to base themselves out of different places, to just keep on moving, and they're thinking about quality of life. They're often, kind of middle-class earners with good educations, but they can get a better quality of life elsewhere in the world. And so we've seen a lot more interest in mobility rather than, say, immigration. So we need to keep that bigger context in mind, too, when we're thinking about local questions here. And I think that's true when we're thinking about strategies for resilience. Now, you saw how important these programs have become to basic government budgets, and the smaller the country's population, the more reliant they are. But I think we also need to be asking about what this means for resilience in the short term, in the medium term, and in the long term. So can the programs help develop countries for the benefits of its people? If so, what does that look like? What changes can we make to improve that element? And if we're thinking about resilience, we also need to be thinking about what is the legacy of the decisions that are being made today. Not just thinking about the moment, but what's the long-term impact, both benefits and risks. Now, we see, for example, a lot of people have interest in, just getting the passport and haven't been interested in the country themselves. But it could be interesting as well if more people do start taking an interest in the countries issuing this, looking for other ways to connect back or give back to the countries as well. And that can raise a whole host of, for example, social issues that I haven't even touched on today. So the fact is that these aren't easy questions to answer, which is actually why I kind of love studying this field. It's always changing, and it's always making me question a lot of my fundamental assumptions about the world. Because this world of citizenship by investment, what it does is it exposes those real complexities of globalization and the world that we're living in today. So if I were to offer my 2 cents here, I'd say the future of the world is one of increasing mobility rather than a story of immigration, like just going from place A to place B. We're going to see more mobility as well. Programs can be a tool in the development toolkit. It's not up to me to decide for a country. It's for a country to decide whether they want a program or not, and it can be a tool in that. But it can be, for some countries, a real lifeline as well when there aren't a lot of other options. But in order for that to assist development, if that is the path chosen by a country, you really need good regulations, and regulations with teeth for that to work well, to make sure that the benefits are really being, potential benefits are being really used to build the country. And especially thinking about the Eastern Caribbean, regional cooperation is absolutely crucial for this to happen. Without regional cooperation, it won't work, and it will be a race to the bottom. And there have been points in time when there has been a race to the bottom, between countries kind of trying to compete against each other. And I think for thinking about the region, that's not a great strategy, because outside of the region, most people can't even tell the difference between the countries. It's sort of like one country says one thing and everybody thinks it's all the same. But it's also, I know, and I'm not even sure, even thinking about Donald Trump, if he could even remember the names of the different countries, get those right. But it's, that element of regional cooperation is absolutely important. So You know, I've been studying this for a number of years. If you're interested in seeing more of my work in this space, I've done a lot of research reports as well. You can go to my website. This is my personal website where I've got it in a more friendly manner. It's presented in a friendlier manner than the LSE does it right now. They've just revamped their website, so it's actually really hard to get good reports from that. But you can go here, you know, check out my work, inform yourself, but then make your own decision. So I'll wrap things up there because I'm really interested in hearing from you and what you think and what your comments and questions are. So thanks very much. Thanks very much for having me. And it's been, you know, fantastic to be able to engage this topic. Sorry.
Thank you, Dr. Surak, for such a thought-provoking presentation. Next, we will have a discussion with Dr. Surak and the Governor of the ECCB, Mr. Timothy N.J. Antoine. Before we go into the discussion, however, and discussion and engagement with Dr. Surak, I invite you to enjoy a musical interlude by saxophonist Blessed Ogbom.
Well, good evening, everyone. And thank you very much for joining us this evening. I'm Timothy Antoine, ECCB Governor. And with me is our distinguished Arthur Lewis Memorial Lecturer, Dr. Kristen Surak. So I want to greet you wherever you are in the currency union and around the world. And in the room, I want to recognize the Governor General of St. Kitts and Nevis, Dame Marcella Liburd, former Prime Minister, Chairman of the Monetary Council, current Senior Minister, Foreign Minister, Dr. Denzel Douglas. Thank you, sir. And of course, I see the Speaker of the House Assembly here as well. So, Dr. Surak, make sure your mic is on. I think we're good. I want to recognize as well the Monetary Council member for Grenada, the Honorable Dennis Cornwall, who is in the room with us as well. So we have a few minutes before we change the order of the program, and what we'd like to do is to hear from you. In the interest of time, I will save some of my questions to hear your questions. But let me just ask you, so just by the way, I met Professor Surak in London in January of this year. Many of us from the region, well, some of our leaders, prime ministers, were there along with a few of us, including myself, meeting with the UK government, who invited us along with the European Commission and the US to discuss this very thing, citizenship by investment, CBI or CIP. And I was curious because I found out she was one of the very few persons in the world who was actually studying this program, a program that means so much to us in the region and for many of our countries, as you have pointed out, a lifeline. How did you get into this? How did you get into this industry? Of all the things you study, you were in Japan for a while, you speak fluent Japanese. Why CBI?
Well, but I should try it. I'm not sure how to turn this on. Do you know?
Yes.
I'm used to projecting my voice, so I can do it if I need to. Oh, perfect. Well, my initial research was on the Japanese tea ceremony, which means you get to go to beautiful places, eat delicious food, and have a wonderful time at the center of Japanese hospitality. And I thought, what other kind of research project can you do that allows you to go to beautiful places, eat delicious food, and enjoy some wonderful hospitality? And it turned out to be this. But to be honest, it was, so it is strange that, I'm a Japanologist. I started off and I came across a wonderful research area. But part of it was I was doing work on labor migration. And Malta started its Citizenship by Investment program. And, I saw it in the news or whatever, and I thought this is kind of interesting vis-a-vis labor migration. And I went to one of these conferences around it, and I realized, now everybody's saying it's just cash for passports, but it's like, no, there's so much more going on here. It's a really complex phenomenon, really complex industry. There's a lot of different, parts to this, and a lot of moving pieces. And what I thought would initially be the final chapter of a book on temporary labor migrations around the world turned out to be a whole book in and of itself that has taken about 10 years to produce. There's just so much that I think, in the region, it's got a particular significance, but I think there's so much we can learn about the world and learn about globalization through this lens as well.
Thank you. And I want to thank you on behalf of the region for coming to this enterprise with an open mind and not prejudging us and coming with a philosophical position that these programs are wrong, immoral, and ought not to be done. And we respect people who do not have programs. But as you pointed out, it is a lifeline for many of our countries. And you showed the numbers. The fact of the matter is that 75 cents of every non-tax dollar in our currency union now comes from CBI, CIP. 75 cents. And a lot of people don't see the programs, don't know what they fund, but they fund things all around us. You drive the Island Main Road in St. Kitts and Nevis, that's CBI. That's CBI. And I can go on and on through the islands. You go to Dominica and you see housing, that's CBI. And we can list them all. So there's a lot more that needs to be done about awareness. But from what you said, there is a future for this program, if I heard you correctly. And I'm asking you to speak to that for a moment, because there is some anxiety in the space about geopolitical shifts and what they portend for the future of this program. And what I heard you say, if I heard you clearly tonight, is that the desire for global mobility remains strong, and there is a future for these programs. They may have to be adapted, we may have to evolve, but there's a future. Am I hearing you correctly?
Yeah, I think there's definitely demand, and that demand will continue to grow. I think if one compares the scene now to, say, 20 years ago, there's much more everyday knowledge about them. I spent half a year teaching at NYU Abu Dhabi, and this citizenship by investment was an everyday conversation. I would meet the spouses of my colleagues, and they'd be like, "Oh yeah, of course, citizenship by investment." You know, it was just simply, it was an area of the world that's like simply known and kind of taken for granted, and it's not seen as a really big deal. So I think as awareness of these programs spreads, it will increase. I think there's also been an increased interest, looking at the changes in the U.S., and especially post-COVID, more and more people who've come from countries that have traditionally been, strong, politically stable, quote-unquote, countries with quote-unquote good passports or whatever, are suddenly thinking, how do I keep my options open? How do I live a more global life? So I found that to be an interesting shift as well. I gave an interview on National Public Radio, NPR.
We change. You seem to suggest, Professor, of our region or development needs, but you seem to suggest that there is a broader possibility to leverage these programs for development impact if we were to see these citizens as an economic diaspora. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and it's a complicated one, too. So I'm not an economist, and so questions about economic development, especially for small island developing states, it's not really the bread and butter of what I do as a sociologist. But what I find interesting in sociology, we talk about nation states, basically countries. There's this idea that the nation or the people are in the state that represents them, and that's how the world works. So if you look at a map of the world, it's a bunch of clear countries, clear borders, solid colors in between, and all of that. That's the nation state. The nation is in the state. When we think about the Caribbean and the Eastern Caribbean especially, these are diaspora nations in the first place. Probably every single person in this room has a family member in New York or Miami or Toronto or London. So these are diaspora nations by definition. There's a lot of CARICOM, inter-CARICOM mobility as well. And then when we think about investor citizens, most of whom are elsewhere in the world, it's interesting to think about this question of what is their attachment or connection involved in these programs. There's interest in seeing Hurricane Relief Fund, if you can get investor citizens, after they became a citizen, to donate to the country. Now, it's what I've seen in going around the world and talking to, wherever you go around the world, there'll be different attitudes and different expectations that people have. Investors in China will have a different set of expectations to investors in Dubai will have a different set of expectations to investors in the U.S., from the U.S., for example, as well. So where that will come or how people relate to that often has will depend on. But I do remember one time in my interviews, I spoke with a person who was Palestinian, who had been born stateless, grew up stateless, and became an investor master citizen in the Caribbean. And when he was telling me about that, he was actually crying. He was sort of connection to the country as well. A friend of a friend in London recently became a citizen in the Caribbean. She was saying that, it was basically she's highly educated, or she became a citizen, highly educated tech person from London, based in London, from Russia, who all of her degrees were in the UK, so she's been able to get residence in London and all of that, but she was just saying she's thinking about it for child and about the future, and she feels and she wants to go to the country.
Some of the best minds of our region are helping the US and the UK and Canada, helping those countries. What we are looking for in this dispensation is a brain gain, where we get skills coming back into the region. Because I've always argued, remittances can never compensate for the loss of critical skills. As useful as remittances are, we will be much further along as countries if we had these skills at our disposal in our countries. Now, there are reasons why they've left, the opportunity, whatever, and so on. Went abroad, studied, children came, family, they stayed. But the reality is that we need those skills. And what I'm hearing you saying is that we have a real opportunity, if we focus on it, to tap some of these skills of persons, whether it's full-time or part-time, to help with our development enterprise. And that's something we need to be thinking about, because that takes us way beyond simply collection of fees at the point of grant of citizenship. Thank you, Dr. Surak. We're going to turn to our audience now to take some questions. So let's see who wants to go first. I'm also going to rely on our team to let us know if anybody's online in any of our member countries or online who wishes to pose a question as well. I see a young lady's making her way. Looks like a colleague of ours.
Good night, everybody. Good night, Governor.
Good night, Jose.
Good night, Dr. Surak. Okay, so my question is, as we talk about geopolitics, right? And we're living in a changing world. We're seeing like everything shift around us. We have this particular vantage point now where we could see things changing. We're seeing changes in the world or the economic shifts around the world, right? I have wondered, this is me personally, that beyond the individual principal motives that were highlighted, whether when we talk about citizenship by investment, there are like strategic power moves happening behind the scenes, where like countries that expose themselves to CBI are maybe chess pieces in a bigger scheme to influence global world power and how decisions are made and things like that. I've wondered that. And I'm wondering now, it doesn't have to be so impossible to believe, because now everything is so transparent. We're hearing about covert operations in Venezuela, biological warfare, all of these things. So in your research, whether or not beyond individuals having these reasons behind their wanting to invest, whether countries themselves are strategically positioning themselves by investing in these programs as well.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I haven't seen so much of that. The only case I can think of is the case of Comoros, where there's a very large stateless population in many of the GCC countries. It's an interesting. I'm fascinated by citizenship and different citizenship regimes around the world. And there's very interesting histories, and the colonial history in GCC countries has a big impact on this kind of tiered forms of citizenship that they have. One of the upshots of that is that if you're a citizen, you get
a lot of rents from the oil in terms of the government. You get free housing, you get free education, you get free medical care. It's great to be a citizen. It means that there's large stateless populations in these countries as well. And there's a great book by a journalist called Atusa Abrahamian.
Repeat that?
There's a book by a journalist, and her name is Atusa Abrahamian, and it's called Cosmopolites. And she writes about the Comoros case where I think it was Kuwait and UAE, where the governments were getting passports from the Comoros to give to their stateless populations in the country to give them some sort of document. So that's the only case I can really think of at that level where you see countries kind of getting involved in a way where you're kind of like, oh, huh. But otherwise, not so much, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. Right. Thank you very much. Let's take another question, please. I see there's a student approaching the mic. Go right ahead.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Dr. Surak. I know you said you're not an economist, but I heard you say your field of study is sociology. Sorry. Test. Sorry. I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Tyler Maynard. I am representing the Washington Archibald High from 4A1. And as I said, I know you said you're not an economics. Your field of study is sociology. But I would like to know, St. Kitts as a small island state, how can we ensure that our citizenship by investment program continues to attract high-value investors without compromising our national security or the long-term sustainability of our economics, or our economy? My bad.
Yeah. Yep. That's the big question. That's exactly the question I was posing to you and asking, what does the region think in terms of its own benefit and risk assessment and whether it's worth it? So I don't want to step in and give answers or what I think of as answers. I think I can only talk about, sort of the trends and patterns that I've seen out there and what countries need to be aware of in terms of, if they choose to have a program, how to structure it in order to make sure that it does the most to build a country as well. But those questions that you're asking are precisely the ones that I think, there needs to be a well-informed public discussion about. So we know, as I was showing, we know that for some of the governments, this has become an incredibly important revenue source. I didn't, and also thinking about what it means for the Eastern Caribbean dollar as well. Absolutely a huge important source. But there's also risks. There's also, you want to have a country too that is livable and you're happy with, and it's a community that you feel a part of and all of that. And so, I don't have an answer to that. But I think that's what I'm hoping that kind of laying out the global scene in these, what I've studied can help inform how people here make their own decisions about that.
Test again. If you would allow me to ask just one more question. I know you gave us the numbers, and I know you said that the delinquents and the criminals contribute a very negligent factor to the overall CBI investors, but my question was really pertaining to how can we ensure that our CBI program does not, influence or encourage criminal activities?
Yeah, that's a very important. Number one, there has to be very good due diligence background checks, making sure these are the right people. Right now in the Caribbean, there's more due diligence background checks for the programs in terms of how they really operate through the units on the ground than, for example, getting a student visa for the UK. The countries will run checks with Interpol, with the JRCC in CARICOM, with private due diligence companies that do background checks for banks as well, and there might be even another level. So making sure those are solid and making sure people don't go around that is really important, I think, for this question of, are these the right people? And I think, too, there's this, when one thinks about making sure that the money is coming into the country and being used in the best way also means you don't need to have a whole lot of approvals for it to make a real difference for the country. And, so this question of making sure they're the right people, one of the easiest way to do that is to keep a program small and tight and make sure those background checks are really solid. They're never going to be 100%. Nothing really ever is, but to make it as solid as possible.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, youngster. I appreciate your questions. And let me add 2 quick points to that and leverage something you said earlier. And one of that is biometrics. So you made the point earlier, and I want to agree with you, that biometrics is going to be extremely important for us to take our due diligence to the next level. And in the agreement that is now being enacted in law, in fact, just to be clear, the CBI, the agreement to set up the regional regulator, the Eastern Caribbean Citizenship and Investment Regulatory Authority, has now gone to all 5 of our parliaments, has been passed into law in Dominica, St. Kitts and Nevis, Antigua and Barbuda, St. Lucia, Grenada. It went to the Lower House and was passed yesterday. It's going to the Senate tomorrow. So by the end of tomorrow, all 5 countries would have passed this legislation into law. We have to give our governments credit for that. In that law is a provision for biometrics. So to address what you said and to answer your question, student from Washington High, biometrics, iris fingerprints, will allow us, that's a gold standard now for identity. That's a gold standard. So one of the risks Dr. Surak mentioned was identity risk, where people can steal identities, pretend to be somebody they're not, hide identities, maybe change their name. With biometrics, you're going to really strengthen our ability to make sure that who you say you are is who you actually are. That is coming under this program with the provisions in that current law. So that's one example of how we're going to be strengthening the programs. I can tell you one other thing. Last week we met, we meaning all 5 countries with programs. ECCB was there, the US, the UK, EU, European Commission, and we had a discussion with the US about the biometrics program. And one of the things that came out of that meeting last week is that there'll be a study tour to the US, because they have a biometrics lab in Virginia, which our teams will look at, as we look to make sure that our biometrics program is compatible with whatever happens in the US, in the UK, and in Europe, so that there is compatibility, all intended to reduce the risk and make sure that there are no issues in terms of our ability to proceed around those concerns about identity risk, money laundering, and so on. We have a question online, so let's see if we could go quickly online, and then we could take maybe one in the room. Here's the question. How sustainable are CBI programs in the current global space, where small island states are subject to unfair attempts to derail and ultimately damage their economies under nefarious pretenses such as involvement in human trafficking?
It's an interesting question. I'm trying to understand whether who the actor is within this, whether the concern is about small islands being used by larger for example, human trafficking chains as stop-off places, and that actually doing damage to the reputation of the country, and then also in combination with citizenship by investment, more difficult, or using the citizenship by investment program as a tool in, for example, like something like human trafficking.
Well, just to say, just if I may assist, my read of the question, and it may be wrong, is that the pose of the question feels that we are up against it in the global community. That there's always a roadblock in our way. That something will be put there. Today it is money laundering, tomorrow it is narcotics, the next day is human trafficking.
Okay.
So the question is, can we survive if there is always some, they put it, nefarious pretense to hold us back?
Okay, yeah, this is, so when I was doing this research, and there's actually quite a lot about it in the books, is the power politics of this space and the power politics of geopolitics in this space and the challenges that small island developing states face against bigger players with their own agendas and not a chance. On top of, and what can also start off with, I live in the UK, and of course the UK is one of the reasons why we have St. Kitts, and the UK paid reparations to slaveholders and not the people who were actually enslaved by them. So there's obviously a long, long history of this that hits countries in this region very, very hard. So what I find interesting in thinking about this, so I live in London right now. I'm in Europe, or ex-EU, unfortunately. My passport is not, my UK passport is not powerful like it used to be. But in Europe, there's a lot of assumptions that people carry about these sorts of programs, and those are very strong in the EU as well, and I see those all the time. But they're different in other parts of the world. So when I go to East Asia, people are really pragmatic. They're just like, oh yeah, of course, yeah, why not? Why wouldn't you do it? It's like they've got no issue in even talking about it. It's a completely different attitude. Dubai as well, people are like, oh yeah, of course, yeah, I saw it, see advertising, whatever. The US is also, I think, shifting as a lot more US citizens are thinking about, what are my exit options? Wait, suddenly, I want to get a passport, and so I can, be where I feel comfortable and safe. So I think, if you were to ask that question in Europe, you'd get one set of answers, but if you were to ask that question in other parts of the world, I think you'd get different answers. And so to really think about it, one can also think about what is over time, what will be the shift in power balance between the global north, or the North Atlantic countries, meaning Europe, US, and the rest of the world. And who knows? The role of the U.S. is shifting quite a lot right now. South-South connections are being built up in ways people didn't expect, as well. The U.S. still has a particular hegemonic position because of the role of the U.S. dollar. But it'll be interesting to see how that changes and what that means for countries in the Eastern Caribbean and some of those, that longer history of roadblock after roadblock after roadblock being thrown up by actors that may in the future not be as important.
Very well. Thank you very much, Professor Surak. Could we get 2 more questions quickly? I see 2 students. Yes.
Good night, everyone. Good night. I am Kayla Penny, representing the Clarence Fitzroy Bryant College and the St. Kitts National Youth Parliament Association. Dr. Surak, you mentioned global mobility and inequality. Considering that some passports are valued far more than others, do you think citizenship by investment programs actually challenge the global hierarchy, or do they end up reinforcing it?
Oh, great question. You've got a lot of really smart students in this room. Thank you for these great questions. So I have colleagues who've written about the global passport hierarchy as well. It's not, and what I've seen in looking at the space and looking at demand is kind of 2 things. So the scholar Dmitry Kochanov will talk about a passport hierarchy. The scholar Yossi Harpaz will talk about strategic citizenship, and he's studied how people from low-income to middle-income countries will be much more strategic about citizenship opportunities than people from high-income countries. So, for example, if you're from Latin America and you move to the US, you naturalize as soon as you can because it's a more it's a stronger citizenship to hold. Whereas if you're a US citizen and you're moving somewhere else, you tend to naturalize the moment you're going back home because you still want to have access to this place where maybe your kids are, where you still have connections and all of that. So it's a different level of kind of pragmatic thinking depending on where you were born, in effect, over which you've get no choice whatsoever. So some people are thinking about, how do I Yossi Harpaz would call it compensatory citizenship. How do I compensate for the fact that I was born in a country that's lower down on that hierarchy? I've also seen people, though, in my research, if we think about U.S. citizens, it's about multiplying options. It's not about compensating for a lack. It's about just making sure the world remains my oyster, in effect. And so I think in that sense, you can see the citizenship, you can see this kind of hierarchy at work in two different ways. One you could say, reinforces it, and one kind of works within that kind of quote-unquote passport privilege. That's already there, just keeping things open. But it's a great question.
Arigato.
You heard that? Of course she did. So those who don't know, she just gave a little Japanese right there. Oh, you were very smart. Let's take one more. That's going to be, and then we'll take, those will be our last two, please.
Good night, everyone. Dr. Surek, Governor. So my question,
You're going to speak a little louder, please?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, speak up, just.
Okay. As I said, good night, everyone. Good night, Dr. Surek, Governor. My name is Mahish Doro. I am a fifth form student from the Basio High School. And my question is from a youth's perspective, as in how the CBI program can create more opportunities for the local youth in terms of scholarships, internships, and job placements.
Right. So opportunities for youth, scholarships, internships, and
job placements.
Right. Thanks for that. I'm going to take this question, and then I'm going to ask you to respond to both.
All right. Good evening. 1, 2. Test.
We need some volume on this mic, please.
Test. 1, 2. All right. Good evening, everyone. I am Vicky Edwards Douglas from the Clarence Fitzroy Bryan College, and I am the SGA president. Now, I was dissecting the topic this evening with one of my friends, Ms. Williams, and we were looking at the presentation which spoke mostly to the CBI program in terms of the economic development and the benefits and these different things, as well as how can it be a danger in some cases. Now, my question mostly zooms in when it comes to the resilient aspect of the CBI program. So this is my question. In what ways can the deliberate cultivation of active, place-based citizenship transform the structural vulnerabilities of small island developing states from economic dependency to resilience? And does this suggest that nation building is as much a civic project as it is an economic one?
Great questions again. Okay. All right. So to the first one, I would just say, it would be great to see these programs doing much more of that sort of thing. And I think this is where, if you're going to have a program, this is where people, should be lobbying governments to say, okay, this is how we want to see it being used to develop the country. And this is, and in a way that it's not just a one-shot thing, but one that leads to greater resilience in the future. Because, and the IMF will always say this about the programs, these sudden stop effects. Because if the money stops, the program stops for whatever reason, then you're kind of left in the lurch. But ideally, the country would have built up some resilience so that it can actually, function without it. It can be seen as an opportunity, but it can be an opportunity only if it's used well. To this other question about, and I'm going to have to think about all the different parts in it as well. So this question of what's nation building, could you rephrase and make sure I get it right?
Sure. So in what ways can the deliberate cultivation of active, place-based citizenship transform the structural vulnerabilities of small island developing states from economic dependency to resilience? And does this suggest that nation building is as much a civic project as it is an economic one?
Okay, so this question of nation, and I say this because as a sociologist, my initial work was on nations and nationalism, and that creation of a national identity and how that works and what it's doing and all of that. a territorial place-based nation is. It's an interesting question to ask, though. You know, for one of the things that has always struck me so much about the region, which is these are diaspora nations in many ways. Everybody has family all over. And the role of the family unit as an economic unit, where people are sending some money back or they're helping kids go to schools elsewhere, this sort of thing, this is kind of how a lot of families get by and how a lot of countries kind of in the region kind of work. So it's because they're less place-based in that sense in some ways, because everybody has family outside, and these family networks are really important. But the questions you're asking too about civic engagement, what does it mean to be here and build up a citizenry or a population around that? For me, it's a question where to be honest, I'm kind of cynical about nations, but I say that as a U.S. citizen who always wanted to leave. And, I'm happy being a foreigner. I like being an outsider. And I think that because of I'm a sociologist, I want to understand, that problematizing of the world all the time is important for me. So this question of building a nation, you can rephrase the term nation to something like a population or a community. And if we think about the Eastern Caribbean as well, there's a lot of even inter-island mobility too. Substantial parts of the population are not, from there, but they might be an important civic part of civic life, an important part of the community. So it's this question of, there's this one thing of, quote unquote, building a society and what goes in and how people feel invested. I think especially in small places where you can know a lot of people and then, it's only a couple of degrees of separation, everybody on the island. That's one thing, and that's really important. The question of the role of economics, I think, has a lot more to do with the infrastructure state side of it. You can have a healthy, thriving community at that social level, but that question of what is the economic support and infrastructure will probably come in some way too. If there aren't good, if there isn't good medical access, if there isn't good roads, there isn't good education as well. So for me, maybe it's because I'm kind of an anti-American American that it's hard for me to answer this question, to feel really nostalgic about nations and national belonging, but I think community is really important in there.
All right, thank you, Dr. Surak.
Thank you very much, Dr. Surak. Thank you very much, students, I'm sure. We have to end there because we have a very important item before we conclude that we must get in before the top of the hour. So we'll have to conclude now. But I'll tell you this. You see those questions that you raise? Those are questions that we have to answer in this region, not Dr. Surak. We who live here, that's for us. So these are excellent questions. We have to wrestle with them and answer them for ourselves. Because at the end of the day, this is our development. We appreciate our research and our commentary, but this is about us. We have to have those conversations. So excellent questions to be continued. And I will tell you, as we've been working on the regulator for the last year, a lot of these very important questions have come up. And we need to have those conversations. By the way, Sniper had an excellent contribution. Thank you very much. I want to take this opportunity. Thank you very much. When that law was put out, the draft for circulation, for comment, we got a lot of feedback, and Sniper, we were, very proud. You all did really well. Thank you very, very much. It makes us feel good about our future and our young people. Thank you. So, Dr. Surak, we will end it here. Thank you very much. One of the things I'm going to ask you to do is, I think on your way to your seat, is to share a copy of your book with some of our distinguished guests. So at this juncture, we're going to invite you to do just that, starting with the Governor General. So our colleague will assist you, and then we're going to turn to the final segment, which is the book award. So please, let's put our hands together again. Thank you so much.
Very much. Thanks very much. Thank you.
For those of you wondering, that's a copy of her book, The Golden Passport. So she's, thank you. I think we're making our way now to Minister Cornwall from Grenada, Monetary Council member. Oh, it's me next. Oh. And this is for the ECCB. Thank you very much, Professor. Much appreciated. Thank you. Thank you very much. Dr. Douglas. Dr. Douglas. Yeah. And this is for Skanaipa. This one is for Dr. Denzel Douglas, the Right Honorable former Prime Minister, and of course former Chairman and Member of the Monetary Council. Thank you very much, Professor Surak. Much appreciated. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you for being a fantastic audience. And I'm really interested in continuing the discussions and hearing what you think.
Thank you.
Thank you, Governor and Dr. Surak, for such an engaging session, and you, the audience, for your participation. Ladies and gentlemen, the next item is the presentation of the ECCB Alison M. Phil's Book Award. But before we get to that, let's take in another rendition from a saxophonist, Blessed Ogbum. Thank you once again, Mr. Ogboom. We now invite the Deputy Governor of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, Dr. Valda F. Henry, to present the inaugural ECCB Alison M. Fields Book Award.
Good evening, Your Excellency, Governor General of the Federation of St. Christopher and Nevis, Dame Marcella Alfia Liebert, the Honorable Minister for Finance and our ECCB Monetary Council member for Grenada, Honorable Dennis Cornwall, Honorable Speaker of the National Assembly of St. Christopher and Nevis, Ms. Lanien Blanchett, I hope I pronounced that name correctly. The Right Honorable Dr. Denzel Douglas, Senior Minister, Minister of Foreign Affairs, International Trade, Industry, Commerce, Consumer Affairs, Economic Development and Investment, and the former Chairman of the ECCB Monetary Council, other honorable members of the Federal Cabinet, members of the Diplomatic and Consular Corps, Governor of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, our own Timothy N.G. Anton and Mrs. Anton, ECCB Board Member for St. Christopher and Nevis, Mrs. Hilary Hazel and Mr. Ellis Hazel, her husband, Chief Director of Policy, Dr. Tracy Polius, all permanent secretaries, Dr. Christine Surak, or the Dean of Studies of the Anguilla Community College and recipient of the inaugural ECCB Alison M. Fields Award, Dr. Michelle Quilly, management and staff of the ECCB, all the students and teachers here represented, all of you online, and I know many are listening based on some comments. Good evening. It is with great pleasure that I stand to present the inaugural ECCB Alison M. Fields Memorial Book Award to the Anguilla Community College. This book award was previously known as the Sir Arthur Lewis Memorial Book Award since its inception in 2009. The renaming of the award honors the late Alison M. Fields, a pioneer of knowledge at the ECCB, for her outstanding contributions to the development of the bank's library and archives. Indeed, Alison's meticulous work and instrumental role in organizing, cataloging, and promoting the bank's library and archives laid a strong foundation for knowledge management at the ECCB. Alison M. Fields, a native of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, joined the ECCB on the 3rd of October 1983 at the age of 24. You realize that's like just 2 days after the establishment of the ECCB on the 1st of October 1983. And over 31 years of dedicated service, she rose through the ranks from a currency assistant, ultimately ascending to the position of Chief Librarian on the 1st of April 2006. She retired from the ECCB on the 2nd of May 2014. 31 long years, that's a whole generation. In February 2019, that's 5 years after she retired, Alison published the ECCB Some Key Historical Facts, which was a labor of love and a testament to her deep commitment to preserving the bank's institutional memory. Alison's memory is also immortalized in the ECCB's virtual museum, which was launched in 2023 while we celebrated ECCB's 40th anniversary, and it is accessible on our main page on the ECCB website. Among her many initiatives, Alison was instrumental in conceptualizing and coordinating Library Awareness Day, which spotlighted the importance of library services, encouraged research, and fostered a culture of reading and knowledge sharing within the bank and wider community. It is in this spirit that the bank engages in its long-standing public education and community outreach efforts that continue to make an indelible impact across all corners of the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union, most notably for our annual Financial Information Month Festival, which just wrapped up its 23rd installment. Presented annually to a community college in the ECCU on a rotational basis, the ECCB Alison M. Fields Book Award will follow in the tradition of its predecessor by affirming the ECCB's commitment to supporting learning by ensuring access to knowledge. The curated collection of books presented through the inaugural ECCB Alison M. Fields Memorial Book Award spans the fields of architecture, economics, education, data science, digital transformation, health, and leadership. These recent and influential books are therefore an invaluable addition to the library of the Anguilla Community College and will contribute significantly to the students' academic and personal development. Congratulations, and may these books, don't come yet, spark curiosity and strengthen the students' commitment to learning, excellence, and the advancement of our region. Before I call on Dr. Quealy to come, I must share a little bit of my personal experience with Alison. I joined the ECCB my first time around on June 15th, 1994. And at the end of the day, in those days, you went to visit the governor, the deputy governor, and they took you around to every staff member. I was staff number 77. We are now 313 and counting. And at the end of that day, when I came, ready to pack up my little things to leave, my then boss, Miss Ingrid Short, now Mrs. Ingrid O'Loughlin, came to me and she said, I have an assignment for you. You are to prepare a paper on the performance of the bond market over the last 3 years and make recommendations for the bank in terms of its investment portfolio and its strategy. Well, I started to laugh. I thought I said, really? You mean you had nobody else to do that? You waited on my arrival for this assignment? I said, well, all right, it shall be done. So the next day, armed with my assignment, I went to the library and I said, Alison, this is my assignment. Now everybody has computers with all sorts of Google here and AI and so on. No, I didn't have those things. We had a nice big computer in the library where you got most of the research done. And Alison did that, and then Alison found books and papers and articles and news items. And after giving me all of that, I prepared my paper, which later was deemed to be a very seminal piece of work at the ECCB. And Alison, throughout my tenure at the bank, provided great support. And when I returned to the fieldwork for my PhD, again, Alison to the rescue. And so I feel really honored that I get the opportunity to present the inaugural Alison M. Fields Memorial Book Award. Truly honored. And so I now call on Dr. Michelle S. Quealy, the Dean of Studies at the Anguilla Community College, to come to collect. Okay. So you're getting only one, but all of the others are here coming to you. This is just for the photo op. Okay, I now pass over the mic to Dr. Quealy, who would like to give a few words. Thanks.
I observe the protocol in place and bid all a pleasant evening. Good evening. Thank you. I accept with humility and gratitude this, the inaugural Alison M. Phil's Book Award on behalf of the Board of Governors, senior management, staff, and the students of the Anguilla Community College. The ACC, as we more commonly refer to it as, is a very small, and I dare say, under-resourced community college compared to many of our regional counterparts. So one can only imagine how pleasing it was when we got the news that we were next in line as the 2025 recipients of the Book Award. We were more so pleased to have been given the opportunity to identify books that, in our estimation, were suited to our unique needs, in addition to what would have been identified for us by way of a pre-designed list. These books, I can assure you, will certainly help to boost our collection and enhance our capacity to serve the needs of our students and more so the community of Anguilla. I wish to end, because I was told I have just about 1 minute, I wish to end, therefore, by thanking the management and the staff of the ECCB, including your colleagues in Anguilla. I think I saw Mrs. Harrigan here. Yes, there she is. So including her and the other staff members in Anguilla for ensuring that all the arrangements were in place for me to get here, and also ensuring that I am well taken care of. I very much appreciate all of your assistance, the ground staff. I met someone just now by the way of a Daldria Penny. Now I can put a face to the name, the person who has been in contact with me. I very much appreciate your level of professionalism, your timeliness, and all that you did to ensure that I arrive here safely, sound, and I am taken care of. Ladies and gentlemen, I know I said I would end, but I wish to end to say one more thing, and that is to congratulate you on a night well spent. I very much enjoyed the lecture. I am not an economist, but an educator. And you know, educators have a unique way of wanting to know more. And I sat in my seat and I questioned. I had many questions to ask, but I was so impressed by the students who came forward and they asked questions. As a teacher myself, that I would have expected that. And so I sort of held back. And, you know, I allowed them to go forward. But I must say, I was not just informed, but I felt empowered. And I'm leaving here feeling empowered, knowing more about the CBI. So I want to congratulate the ECCB and all of the persons who have worked behind the scene. Dr. Surak Wright, I want to congratulate you also on a fantastic job. Thank you very much for having us, and once again I register the appreciation, deep appreciation of the Anguilla Community College. Thank you and have a great evening.
Congratulations once again to the Anguilla Community College. Ladies and gentlemen, as we come to the end of this evening's event, we invite Governor Antoine to deliver the closing remarks. Governor.
Well, thank you very much, Master of Ceremonies, Dr. Thompson. I am standing between you and lovely dinner, standing cocktail reception, and so I will be very brief. I've already acknowledged some of the protocol, the key dignitaries, so I'll stand on that. I just want to say again to you, Professor Surak, thank you so much for that really informative, interesting, riveting tour of the world with CBI, and for what you've done with respect to bringing your research to our region. Let's put our hands together again for and one of the things that Professor Surak is going to do while she is with us this week at our campus is, and she started that actually today, is an engagement with our bank about potential research possibilities. We want to bring more scholarship to this enterprise of CBI-CIP. Given what it means for our region, given the lifeline that it is, we have to invest more of our intellectual power resources into understanding that industry and helping to preserve it and to ensure its long-term sustainability. So, for example, on Friday of this week, she is going to be, with our assistance, the bank, we'll be convening our country's policy units. I think financial secretaries have been invited or at least informed, and others with the ECCB to discuss potential opportunities for us to do joint research in this important area. So that's one other legacy benefit of her coming to do this Arthur Lewis Memorial Lecture for us. We are also hopeful that we might be able to do joint work with LSE as we go forward in this important area. So thank you very much again, Dr. Surak, for your contributions this week. I want to thank everyone for coming, but students, oh, you blessed my heart this evening. Thank you so much. Let's put our hands together for our students. I know there are all kinds of narrative about our youth, but we have a lot of good young people, smart young people, engaged young people, and it's our job to help them, to empower them so that they can make their rightful contribution to nation building. Should I say regional building our region. And so I want to thank our students and their teachers from all the schools who came to participate in the Sir Arthur Lewis Memorial Lecture this evening. I recognize in the room our licensed financial institutions. Tonight is a curtain raiser for what will be for the next day and a half, 2 days, our annual meeting of licensed financial institutions. So they're mainly our banks, but we have a couple we have 7 non-banks under the Banking Act, so we call them licensed financial institutions. Tomorrow we'll begin the formal conference with a very interesting focus on the intelligent age, AI, digital transformation, innovation, and so on. And then we'll have the business session on Friday. So I want to recognize all of our licensed financial institutions who have joined us. I see some of the presenters, and I see some of the LFIs, senior CEOs and senior management who have come. Let's put our hands together for them as well. And for everyone else who's joined, there's a long list. You heard the list. I won't go through it again. I want to thank you for your participation. And I do want to recognize those who've joined us from across the currency union. Whenever we do these things, we always try to be inclusive. For us, that means we live stream all of our major events. We take the extra step of booking time on radio and television to make sure that the people of our currency union, all 8 of our member countries, are involved, are engaged, and that their voices are heard. So for those of you who joined online, joined via radio or television tonight, I say thank you, and we look forward to continuing the dialogue with you. Tomorrow morning will be again live streamed, so you can continue to catch the action and be part of the conversation over the next, well, certainly tomorrow. Finally, to say that what you heard tonight, and I'll end with this, is that notwithstanding all of the challenges with respect to the programs and the headwinds that our programs are facing, there remains a demand for global mobility. And while we have to continue to evolve and we have to continue to adapt, which we must, we have an opportunity to continue to have these programs deliver real development impact, real benefits for our people. And it is our job collectively to work very hard to protect the integrity of these programs, to increase transparency, promote transparency, and to preserve and to promote long-term sustainability. The recent decision of our 5 governments, which have programs to move forward with an agreement that is now in law to set up a regional regulator, is a very important step. And I can tell you, having engaged with international partners as recent as last week, there is significant support for the stride that we've made with respect to this regional regulator. I could also say to the industry, since some of you are in the room, that very soon we will publish a first series of frequently asked questions and answers based on what you want to understand about the new law. Things like the residency requirement, things like understanding how the biometrics program is intended to work, among other things. We will also be working very early on some draft standards to make sure that we can give clarity and guidance, regulatory guidance to the industry. We know uncertainty is not good for business, and so we will do our very best to minimize uncertainty, to provide clarity. But to help us understand, this is an important step that we're making for the preservation and long-term sustainability of these programs. And therefore, the mindset should be a growth mindset, and the approach should be, we must adapt and overcome. We must adapt and overcome. Every time we face a shock, we face a hurdle, we find a way, as we must, to adapt and overcome. Ladies and gentlemen, that is all I wish to say. Thank you very much. God bless you all. Good night to all.
Thank you, Governor Antoine. Ladies and gentlemen, please stand as the Governor General of the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis and other dignitaries exit. We also invite you all to join us following the exit around the fountain for the cocktail event.